Welcome to the Legal Shark Tank, Strategies for DUI and Beyond with Shane the Shark, where we'll discuss the complexities of the legal system, demystify the process of criminal defense, and provide you with the tools and confidence to navigate your case.
Hey there, and welcome to the Legal Shark Tank, Strategies for DUI and Beyond with experienced attorney Shane Herzner. My name's Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to discuss how to challenge the stop, the legal grounds for DUI, OVI traffic stops. Shane, so good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kevin. It's good to be here again.
All right, so let's start off by just talking about the legal grounds for a law enforcement officer to initiate a traffic stop in Ohio.
Sure. Obviously, any kind of traffic infraction gives a law enforcement officer probable cause to stop a vehicle, to initiate at least a routine traffic stop at that point. And then depending on what else they see during the traffic stop, that can prolong the stop to where they can do a DUI investigation and things like that. Most of the common reasons for stops are speeding. You'll see a lot of speeding cases that lead to OVIs. You'll see a lot of marked lanes, especially Ohio State Highway Patrolmen love to mark people down for marked lanes violations. And then, of course, the worst case scenario is if you have an accident. Those are the three most common, I would say, reasons why an officer pulls somebody over and then starts a DUI investigation or an OVI investigation.
Is marked lanes just kind of going over the line? Is that?
Yes, and there's a lot of case law on marked lanes, so it's kind of all over the place depending on which appellate district you look at in Ohio. So in most of the appellate district does require that you have to cross the line. You can't just hit it. Hitting it is not enough to pull somebody over for a marked lanes violation. And we also have to look at the way the statute reads, where it indicates, is you're supposed to use due diligence as much care as possible staying in the lanes. So, for instance, if you're in a construction zone or where they're paving the road and the road is all in a mess at that point.
Sure. I've
seen officers who have pulled people over because the person went outside of the lines in those type of areas. And I've seen judges grant motions to suppress saying, look, they're supposed to use due diligence in driving. And if there are potholes and things like that, they're able to move around those. So that's not considered a marked lanes violation if you're doing things like that. So, yeah, there's all types of reasons why a person may drive outside of a lane that have nothing to do with impairment. But that is something that officers will cite you for. And there are, believe it or not, there are certain courts, or I should say jurisdictions here in Ohio, where because the Ohio statute says it has to be across the line, and that's what the case law says, they've actually written it in their municipal code sections, their own mayor's court or city court code sections that allow people to be stopped if they hit the line. So some courts have gotten around that by changing their statutes, their local statutes and ordinances.
Interesting.
Yes.
I've heard before that, I remember when you're in driver's ed, you get this little book with all the rules in it, but the actual rule book is like way thicker just for reasons for just different ways that you can be pulled over. Is that accurate or not?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of latitude that's given for reasons to pull somebody over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had license plate lights where people have been pulled over because their light is out or it's not bright enough. That's the one that always kills me. It's their license plate light isn't bright enough to where you can see it from a certain distance. The good news now is that a lot of the police agencies still have cruiser cam. Mm-hmm. Not all of them, probably not even most of them, but there are a lot more now that have cruiser cam. I've seen most officers or police agencies go more towards body camera than cruiser cam. So that limits the ability sometimes to challenge the reasons for the stop.
We've all seen those YouTube videos where it's like funniest, shouldn't be funny, I guess, but you know what I mean? Like it's like where someone is like challenging the police officer with the dash cam footage. And that's a good segue. I wanted to ask you about the dash cam or body cam footage and how does that play in defending clients against improper stops?
If you have a good dash cam, most of them are pretty good. It plays a big part because it allows you to see everything and it allows you to show a client too. I think that's important because if I'm telling a client or making a recommendation to a client, they need to have all the same information that I have. So it's important for them to see the video. So if there is something where it shows a marked lanes violations and it's pretty obvious, what I found is most of the marked lanes violations that I see are marked lanes violations that we commit every single day. Like we cut a turn too quick or things like that. But because it's at 2 o'clock in the morning instead of 2 o'clock in the afternoon, officers are pulling you over for that stuff. Somebody pulling over to a turn lane into the right hand to make a right hand, they turn over too quickly into the turn lane. I mean, it's just ridiculous things sometimes that you see for the marked lanes. It's not as you would expect to see, like, oh, well, they're way over the line driving on a straight road. That is a lot less common than these usual driving infractions that people make every day. I mean, I could see them in that same intersection that this trooper is pulling somebody over for. I guarantee I could go to that same intersection and show you the exact same marked lanes violations at different times, and they would never pull somebody over.
Just numerous times, I would bet.
Yes.
So how do you analyze and challenge the legality of a traffic stop in OVI and DUI cases?
Like you said, if they have a video, we always try to use that video. That's first and foremost in that on there. Or if there are any kind of witnesses to it, because sometimes, if you have a client, they have a passenger in the car that can also testify to what had happened. When there aren't cameras, it does make it a lot more difficult to challenge the grounds for the stop. Now, speeding has always been a tough one to challenge too, because it's so hard. When you're looking at these dash cams, it doesn't show how fast the officer clocked them at. So dash cam is really comes in to play more for like the marked lanes violation or running a red light, running some sort of stop sign, not coming to a complete stop. I've had cases where the officer said, well, they didn't stop behind the stop bar. Again, things that people do every single day but aren't stopped for it unless it's 2 o'clock in the morning. So dash cam helps to solve a lot of those issues where sometimes officers' opinions differ. I remember I recently had a case where it was a case back in February where we had a little bit of snow. We hardly get snow here in Cincinnati, but we had a little bit of snow. And so his car was leaving tire tracks to where you could clearly see that this person did not make a marked lanes violation on the street. Or if they did, you couldn't see that it was a marked lanes violation because the street was covered with snow.
Because you couldn't see the line,
You couldn't see the lines. So that would be one of those cases where you can make arguments, hey, well, we think that he was within the lines, but if it feels that he was outside the lines, it makes sense why a person would be because of the different weather conditions. So I think that that's what you try to use is, hey, what would a normal person do in these circumstances if you don't have video? Try to ask that or question the officer. I remember a case once that I had where a person switched lanes. They used their turn signal, but I think in Ohio, you're supposed to use it 100 feet before you switch lanes. Well, who does that? Who waits 100 feet to switch over?
And so how on earth can you realistically measure that distance? I couldn't. No way.
It's insane. So this trooper pulled this person over because they didn't, put their signal on before changing lanes the proper distance.
Wow.
And that was one where I thought for sure we went on the motion to suppress. Unfortunately, we did not. But I think that a jury looking at those things, even if the court finds that there's probable cause to pull somebody over for it, it brings into a lot of question that a jury is like, this is stuff that happens all the time.
And, with distracted driving becoming a bigger issue these days, obviously with cell phones, I would imagine a lot of people probably get pulled over for the changing lanes thing with officers wondering if they're intoxicated, but not. Does that ever cause problems? Like where there's like a disagreement between the driver and the officer because like, no, I'm not, I'm fine. I shouldn't have looked at my phone or something like that.
Absolutely. And I think that that's probably the most common reason. If you do see a marked lanes violation that's noticeable, it's because somebody is on their cell phone. They're looking for directions for things like that. Now, Ohio just went to where you're not supposed to have your phone in your hand at all.
Right.
It's no handheld devices in the car. And that's just something that came about somewhat recently here in Ohio, where before you could have it out, but you couldn't be on it. Now you cannot, it has to be hands-free if you're using it. But so many times I couldn't tell you where somebody's using the GPS and their GPS gives them wrong directions, or they're trying to figure out something and they go to reach for their phone. And next thing you know, you real quick jerk. That's generally from some sort of distracted driving. And you will, and I tell the clients, or I tell people, look, that's what's happening. You've got to let the officer know, because if you're going to try to make that argument to me, or we're going to try to make that argument later in court as to the reason why you made the marked lanes violation, it comes off, I guess, less credible if you bring it up for the very first time when you're at trial instead of when the officer approaches you. Hey, look, I'm sorry, I took my eye off the road for a second because I was messing with my phone. That gives some credibility to the reason why you may have made that marked lanes violation. But it is much more common nowadays with the cell phones.
I would imagine. I mean, yeah, it's a good law. I mean, how many times you see people like with their phone up and you're driving by them and you're like, good, no wonder you were driving like a jerk.
Yes, slow. They go so slow. They'll speed up and then they'll start slowing down. And yes, I've experienced that quite a few times myself.
Oh, it's brutal. Can you discuss any notable cases where a traffic stop was ruled unconstitutional and how it affected the outcome of the case?
Yes, I think I talked a little bit about it when I had a case where a person was driving through a construction area and they had not repaved the road yet. And so all these manhole covers and things like that were there. And my client was driving to avoid hitting those because, of course, you never know, especially potholes. Potholes can cause tires to go flat and things like that. So they're using due diligence and driving is within the marked lanes as they possibly can, given in consideration the road conditions. And so that person was pulled over. Officer brought him out and made him do a bunch of field sobriety tests. Fortunately, they also refused to do a breath test. So we were able to do a motion to suppress. And the court did find that the officer did not have probable cause to pull the car over. And so she granted the motion. In Ohio, that's generally what you'll do. If there's an issue with the stop, you file a motion to suppress. And if you can get the stop thrown out, the whole case is thrown out because anything after the stop then goes away. So that's why it's important to look at all that stuff when it comes to the stop to determine, hey, was it a constitutional stop? Are there any issues? Do they have grounds for the stop? And if they don't, make sure that you file that motion to suppress to get that out and give your client the best defense possible. And like I said, even if you don't get it tossed out, sometimes it's good for a judge, if you decide to do a bench trial or a jury trial, to at least have that out there so you can see, hey, this wasn't something that was egregious that you would think a drunk person would be doing, but this is the same type of traffic offense that anybody does on a given day. So that's one case that I could think of that was pretty prominent, that is because that person actually had some prior DUIs. So the prosecutor wasn't very happy that case got tossed out for that. It's so incredibly important, though, to do that on a motion to suppress. So in Ohio, when we file motions to suppress, it's generally, again, for general basis on about 4 grounds. 1, PC to stop, so probable cause to stop the car, probable cause to arrest. So even if they have probable cause to pull a car over for a traffic offense, do they have the ability to pull them out of the car? What are their grounds to get them out of the car to continue to have the person stay there? So to investigate, they have to find certain things. Then you have, of course, you can suppress the breath test if there's proper grounds to suppress the breath test. And oftentimes, officers will not read Miranda rights. In Ohio, that doesn't mean that the whole case gets tossed out because they didn't read your Miranda. They only have to read your Miranda if they are going to interrogate you. So if they're going to question you after an arrest, they have to read your Miranda or else those statements get tossed out. I couldn't tell you the number of times I get phone calls, hey, well, they never read me Miranda, so I got a winner here. I'm like, that they don't do it very often in DUIs because once they
watch too much TV, kid.
Once they determine to get you to arrest you for a DUI, they generally don't ask you any more questions after that. Or if they do, they have a signed Miranda form. That's not a common thing for them to do, believe it or not, in DUI stops is to read Miranda. So yeah, the stop could be, I mean, you look at a lot of different things when it comes to the stop too, because there's different things that officers have to look for. So, for instance, did they pull the car over appropriately? Is it on the side of the road? Did they stop appropriately? Did they hit the curb? Those type of things. There's lots of things that you can observe besides the traffic violation that you can use in your defense of a case.
Yeah, that makes sense. What should individuals do if they believe they were stopped without reasonable cause?
The less they say, the better. Obviously, if there were some issues with, I think we talked about the cell phone, let them know, hey, look, I was on the phone. But other than that, I would keep your statements to a minimum. Let your attorney do the legwork, because if there are issues with stop, if you have a good DUI or OVI attorney, they're going to make those arguments. They're going to look at the videos and they're going to represent you appropriately. You're not going to win an argument, though, on the roadside And I've seen so many cases where I thought, hey, these are great cases. And then you have the person that keeps talking and talking and talking to the officer. And the more they talk, the worse the case gets.
Yep.
So I always tell people, the less you say, the better. Tell them you want to speak with an attorney before making any statements, especially if they're pulling you out to these field tests, these roadside tests, because there's nothing really that you can do at that point that's going to save you from getting arrested.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. At that point, you're just, all you're doing is digging at that point. You're giving them just more material.
And because Ohio's statute says that the OVI statute says that they can arrest you if they believe you're impaired, I've had clients who have tested under. So they've been arrested on scene. So you're always arrested on scene before you're even offered a chemical test. Then they go back to the station. If you take a chemical test, they add a second code section to it. But I've had clients who have gone back to the station, tested, and they tested under. Well, you're still under arrest for an OVI because of the opinion-based OVI section that you were arrested for on scene. So those are things to take into consideration too. One of the other reasons why I tell people it's just not worth it to take the chemical test. Let your attorney do the legwork and work for you. You're in the best position to just stay quiet and be polite to the officer, but you don't have to give them any additional information.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people are just under the assumption that if they don't take the test, it's an admission of guilt.
I think they have that, and also they're trying, because we're taught as kids, well, you're supposed to be polite and cooperative with officers. You're supposed to do everything they tell you to do. You can still be polite and cooperative and still hold your constitutional rights to not incriminate yourself. And that's what I tell my family, and that's what I tell anybody who asks me. You do not have to take these chemical tests, and you're not being uncooperative or anything like that because of that. And because Ohio makes arrests on the roadside before you even offered a chemical test, I think it's fair to argue, and this is what I make arguments on refusals. The officer's going to arrest you. They've already made the arrest. They don't unarrest you when you take a breath test. So no matter what that breath test is or was going to be, it doesn't matter at that point because you've already been placed under arrest. So once jurors understand that process, that, oh, hey, well, I thought if you went back to the station, you blew under, you would be okay. You're not. Once they understand that process, then it's a lot easier to explain why somebody would refuse to take a breath test.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did not know that. And what about, and just to clarify, we talked about the field tests a little bit, I think on the last episode. Do you recommend not doing the field tests as well?
I do. I just don't see any reason why, because of the nerves. And
the nerves, yeah.
I just recently had a flat tire on the highway, and I had to put my spare on. And I'm telling you, those cars, especially on the highways, standing on the side of the roadway, those cars fly by.
It's freaky.
And that wind.
I've been there too. Yeah.
It's incredibly scary to be there. So I could only imagine to try to do tests where they're testing balance, and there are cars that are going by, or those flashing lights too are so incredibly distracting that it's really, really difficult to kind of hold your composure and still conduct these tests. So I just say, just don't do them. They're not going to help you in particular case. And the best case for me as a defense attorney is being pulled over for something like I told you, a license plate light being out. So they pull you over for that, or even speeding, and you don't do the field test. You don't do a breath test. At that point, what do they have to show impairment? It's very, very little. And I think it's a very difficult case for a prosecutor to prove if there are no field tests and no breath tests. Now, obviously, that changes a little bit if an accident is involved, because I think that throws in some complexities that attorneys have to figure out at that point. But for the most part, if it's just a normal traffic offense with no field test, no breath test, it's a good defense case for us to fight in most circumstances.
Good advice. Well, thank you all for joining us on the Legal Shark Tank Strategies for DUI and Beyond with Shane Herzner. To get in touch with Shane, please visit herznerlaw.com. And of course, like and subscribe to the channel. We love having you. Shane, great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks again, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.